Hiram was up to his neck in hot water yet again, and all he could do was resign himself to the circumstances. It was bliss. It was almost perfect. The only thing marring this moment of comfortable bathing were the elves left and right shamelessly giving him the side-eye. And here he had thought they were supposed to be the picture of courtly grace. He did his level best to ignore the prickling of the hair on the back of his neck. No few of those befuddled stares were anything less than aggressive, and he supposed he had earned the black looks. Here he was bathing in one of their pools after all, and all this despite the invitation he had been so begrudgingly given. It was tradition among the fair, oh so incredibly fair, folk, to extend invitations to their places of power for those they deemed worthy. Some, it seemed, balked at the idea of tradition when it seemed humanity stood to benefit. Or maybe it was that Hiram had shown up their oldest mage. He chuckled dryly to himself. The sound no doubt picked up even amidst the burbling of the hot spring water feeding his pool. An equal argument could be made that he'd less benefited from tradition and more taken advantage of it. Hiram had figured out pretty quickly it wasn't often an outsider came strolling up to their demences, demanding what was to them nothing short of a fight to the death, and, well. He smiled, and sank just an inch deeper into the so-pleasant water, his chin now touching its surface. Well indeed, fucker didn't expect me to have a counter to his every move. Old Stick couldn't unbend enough to realize that there could maybe be other ways of casting magic than what he'd known. And maybe that was the source of all the animosity. It could still be that they'd still be staring not quite daggers into his skull, even if he had been as polite as could be. He supposed he wouldn't take kindly either, not only to be challenged by a stranger, by a young upstart no less, but to then be quite literally schooled on the magic he himself had thought himself a past master at. Maybe if Hiram hadn't so thoroughly proven himself? They couldn't deny him the soak in the spring, after all. Instinct against intellect, art against science, the felt versus the known. And no wonder that elder crumbled so swiftly, with that sort of false dichotomy in mind. Hiram had, in short, approached with a perspective on magic that was nothing less than precise. His was a magic of measurements, of numbers, and of empirical facts. The elves, meanwhile, intuited their spells. Creativity, intuition, the gut. Well, maybe not that last. They're too prissy to put it so crass. He hummed to himself and allowed his thoughts to wander. There were upsides and downsides to both modes of thought. No human alive, and likely not even any elves, could think at a pace to outstrip the unconscious leaps of logic one's intuition could perform. All well and good to know the empirical counter to any given form of magic, but when fractions of a second mattered in combat, it was a bit of a lost cause to identify a spell after a foe had thrown it. The spring water had chilled. Hiram grimaced, thinking this was likely their attempt to edge him out of that pool of so heady water. Well, hang it, I'm not done thinking. An effort of will, a precise weave of the energies so abundant here, and the water was back to steaming once more. Let that put a pin in their britches. He smiled, with self-satisfaction, and continued to so thoroughly ignore those glares. So, even at the speed of thought, the unconscious mind is faster. What is an arithmetician to do? Hiram had to stifle a chuckle at the title. Sure, in some realm one could make the argument that what he did involved math, but even the elves used math in their spell work. That was nothing new. No, what was new was the trick of a little spell Hiram kept to himself. No telling the madness that would take the world when the trick of the thing leaked. If conscious thought can't outpace unconscious, why not bring the latter to the fore? Of course, anyone who heard anything about the idea would either run screaming or burst out laughing. It was absurd, really. Insanity, madness, or mania were the gentlest things to hope for with bringing one's undermind to the fore. Never mind that it worked at a speed to drive it mad, with how slow the overmind thought before even half a moment had passed. The real issue was just how primitive it was. The running theory spoke something along the lines of its interference being limited only to pick-and-choose information, and the running thoughts at the forefront of a man's mind. Imagine the terror of a hindbrain with all the memories of a given person at its disposal. For a primitive hunk of fat designed only to provide the responses of fight or flight as needed, the idea of memory was quite incomprehensible. As far as anyone could gather from past experiments, the undermind couldn't differentiate between past and present. It, as a matter of course, will react to every memory as if it was happening then and there. And at the sheer clip at which it could act, well, the results were catastrophic for someone with magic at their beck and call. Hiram ran his tongue over the tops of his teeth, grumbling contemplatively to himself as he worked for the solution. The crux of the problem was a disconnect in immediacy. The undermind treated every memory as now. It couldn't act with context. How does one give context without the thing acting immediately on it? He bared his teeth, just slightly, much to the disgust of the elves around him, and tapped his fingers on his thighs under the water. It really is so much of a trick, isn't it? And here everyone thought pre-science was useless. And really, it was useless. In a world in which future histories diverge so radically, just fractions of a second ahead of the now, in which the futures themselves could react to the presence of foresight alone, twisting and altering through simply being observed, it was no wonder no one used it. Nothing could keep up with it. Nothing except, of course, the undermind. Hiram sighed and sunk just a little deeper into the warm bathwater. It was nice feeling all the muscles in his body unknot. Nothing except the undermind. It was kind of beautiful, actually. If the undermind acted on memory, as if it were now, and couldn't be given a meaningful translation of memory, then have it act on the future. Pre-science itself caused futures to diverge, and that was ignoring the absurdly branching tree of possibility from basic reality alone. What better thing to prune and refine the useful branches than the undermind? React in fractions of a second, 2 fractions of a second of a future that's yet to happen, in such a way as to narrow that future to the best possible outcome of the next half a second, and iterate from there. Of course, employing that level of thought for any prolonged period resulted in all sorts of wonky side effects. Maybe so much of the disgust the elves had for Hiram was simply a result of him puking his guts up the moment the duel ended. Either way, he couldn't know. Not without puking again. And that would ruin his bath.